Okay, so today we're going to do a reboot of exercise 108, lecture 108, etc. because of the noise. The hope is that they'll be working on a different part of the roof today. And so we won't have to deal with the noise quite as much. At least that's the hope. Yeah, knock on wood. It'll probably happen for my second class. My second class yesterday was fine, but anyway. So I apologize a bit because we obviously already started talking about this lecture. I already started with the beginning, but I'm going to go back through it as if last class never happened. So we're just going to pretend that that never happened, and we're going to start fresh with this lecture. So the purpose of this lecture is to learn how to integrate different pieces in Photoshop such that they look and feel realistic. They belong in the scene. So we're going to focus on adding people to two different scenes. The first is going to be an urban street scene. The second is going to be a landscape scene. They're set up with the urban street scheme being first, the landscape being second, because the urban scene is much easier than the landscape scene. So we build on certain skills. This is something that we will do quite a lot towards the end of the semester when we start doing our collage work. So you'll get a lot more practice at the end. But I think at this point in the semester, it's good to introduce this as a process, certainly in advance of your upcoming assignment 102. Remember, we shifted everything as if Monday didn't happen. So assignment 102 is due next class. So you have the weekend to work through it and get it prepared, etc. So I think what we're talking about today will certainly help with what you're trying to do as part of your assignment 102. The other thing that I want to tell you all is that you will get your first grade sheet today. I'm not going to pass them out until after I'm done lecturing. I will then pull up a sample grade sheet so that we can talk through it. Because you're in 135, chances are you haven't had one of my classes before. A couple of you were in 136, so you're familiar with the grade sheets, although they changed slightly from last year's version of the grade sheets. So I'll talk through what it all means. A lot of you will panic when you see your first grade sheet. That's normal, probably because you didn't do comments yet, right? And we'll get you caught up on comments, and it won't be an issue anymore. And you don't have to worry. It's not permanent. It's just kind of your first check-in of the semester. Okay, so let's start talking about this particular scene. And before we can really add a person into the scene, we have to start with kind of a general analysis of the scene and what's going on in the particular scene. So just like I did last class, I'm going to draw on top of this scene just a bit so that we can start to see what's going on. So the first thing that we notice is that the shadows are all cast from the right side here going toward the left side. Right? We could see it there. We could see it right there, etc. So essentially what we have is we have a sun that's in somewhere up in this corner. It's probably off the screen over here. That's shining down on our objects and therefore casting a shadow. So if, for example, I had a little person and that person was standing here. Sorry for the terrible drawing here. They were standing on the ground here. Their shadow would be cast going off in this direction like that. Okay? And I'm learning that because of the other shadows that are in the scene. So when you go to pick your particular scene, you're going to want to make sure that it has some strong shadows. So if I did search.creativecommons.org, maybe not. We'll come back to that. The point is that you want to make sure that you have a scene that has some strong shadows in it. You could do a scene. Let me open another scene here. You could do a scene like this. That's a night scene. It has known light sources. So when you did your shadows in this particular scene, this would obviously be challenging. You'd have several shadows being cast by the light sources, and those shadows would overlap. So this is a far more difficult scene to try to integrate. So I wouldn't recommend that. I would recommend just a basic sun scene with basic shadows. So something like this is pretty reasonable. Okay, so now that we know approximately where the sun is, etc., we have to start analyzing this photograph. And as we talked about last class before the noise interrupted us, there are some critical elements to a particular scene that will help us kind of guide how these images combine together. In this nature, we have what's called a one-point perspective, which means that there's a single vanishing point right out here in the middle of the scene, and that all the lines in the scene converge to that particular point. So if I followed this line along the street here, it would end up falling to that point. If I followed this line along the edge of this street, it would end up coming to that point. Looks like my point was a little bit high. This line here would also end up there. These wires up above, oh, that was terrible, would come down and connect with that point. You get the idea, right? If I were to connect these lights together, same points, they would end up meeting at that same point. Okay? So it takes practice to learn where this vanishing point really is, and you just want to try to follow known lines down to the vanishing point. In this particular image, it's slightly confusing because it's on a slight downhill. So you couldn't just pick something at eye level down the street because the street curves away from us just a little bit. So each photo that you pick is going to be slightly different, but you can still very much get to where that vanishing point would be. Let me go ahead and open another photo just for illustration purposes. Let's use this one for a second. Something very similar. Okay, this one's even easier though because we have an ocean at the end of the street, right? Chances are that is going to go off until wherever the vanishing point would be, right? The nature of a vanishing point or a horizon line is essentially you're standing on the beach, you look out at the ocean, and at some point the earth curves away from you and you see the edge, right? And so we can assume that that line right there is approximately where that point would be, okay? Furthermore, if I were to draw lines from this street to there, draw lines down this to there, right? We could approximate where a line would be coming off the top of these buildings, kind of coming down that direction there. You get the idea, right? They're vanishing at that particular point. So let me jump back to this image, and we'll create another new layer so I can turn that off. So once I know where the vanishing point is and where the horizon line would be, I may put a guideline in just for my own reference. And I can do that by going up to the View menu, and I can check the box for rulers. Okay? In my case, it's already checked. Yours may or may not be already checked. That shows these rulers that go across at the top of the page. If I click and drag from one of the rulers down, I can create a horizontal guideline that I can set as where I think my horizon line would be, which is probably right about there or so. And that just creates a temporary guideline that goes across my screen, and I can then work within that context. Okay? So I have that guideline. Now it's time to bring somebody into the scene. So I'm going to go find a person, and I'm going to put that person into the scene. So let me go to File and then Place. And again, I have already downloaded a bunch of people. You created people in your exercise 107. You cut them out and got rid of the backgrounds. You can use your own people. You can use other people. But as we start to pick people, we want to pay a little bit of attention to what the light looks like on these people. Okay? So if I went, let me open up a window here so we can look at some of the people that I already have downloaded. Okay, so let's look at these people really quick, right? We can see as we look at it that the light is shining from this direction going down, and we've got shadows on the sides. She's casting a shadow onto him, right? Likewise, there's a shadow on that side. There's a bit of a shadow on the back edge, right? Those are all good things because the shadows would be going in the right direction, okay? If we open another one of these, right? Let's open, let's say this one. Okay, we've got light halo on the right side of these people, which is good. We wanted that on the right side of the people. But notice that the fronts of these people are in shadow. This means that the sun is actually behind them, shining toward them. Okay, we have the opposite condition in our particular scene here, where the sun is right on this side, shining back based on the direction of the shadows. So those people wouldn't be the best people to pick. Right? Let's see. Let me open up this person for a second and see. Okay, similar, we can look at the hat here. You see the light is almost entirely straight behind them, shining forward. So that's not a particularly good person for this scene. Okay, let's take a look at her. All right, in this instance, right, the shadow is on the front side of her. Her back is in the sun, right? You can see the shadow on her face. So the sun is from the opposite direction, shining forward. Now, I could still use her. I would just have to flip her. Okay, and I will end up using her so that you can see that as an example. Okay, so let's start with this person. Okay, this is who we were working with last time. Actually, I don't really like her hair. Let's do the couple. Let's do these two people. Okay, so let me go ahead and place them into the scene. There they are. Okay, now in this instance, they look like giants in this particular scene, so they're not at the right level. So we talked about last time making sure that the eye level is approximately at the horizon. So just by shrinking the two of them so that his eye level is approximately at the horizon, she's a little bit shorter, that works. We're looking for an average here, right? They start to feel like they belong in the scene. They're the right size. If I shrunk them this way, recognize I'm holding down Shift, and again made sure that their eye level is at that horizon line, they would feel like they're fitting better into the particular scene. Do you guys see how that works? Okay. Likewise, if I wanted them to be really far into the scene, right, we again keep their eye level about the same, and we put them way down into the scene. Okay. For the nature of what we're doing, I want them to be a little bit closer into the foreground here. We'll put them right about there, right? And remember, the nature of composition, you want to think about where elements belong in a particular scene, right? I'm putting them right here because they're going to cast a good shadow this direction. So it'll work nicely for what I'm trying to do. Okay, so now that I have their height set and I have them placed approximately where I want them to go, I'll go ahead and click this check mark to finish the place. Remember when I did the resizing, I held down Shift so that they didn't get squished, right? You don't want people to look like that. That wouldn't be correct. So now that I'm done, I'll check this box to commit to the place. And there they are in the scene. And we can see that it shows up on a layer as people. Okay? So this isn't too bad. They've shown up. These people are probably a little bit bright for this particular scene. If we look at the colors in this scene, they stand out a little bit much. So it's probably worth adjusting maybe the saturation down so that it matches up with the background scene. I can do that by adding an adjustment layer. So let me go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and we'll do a Hue and Saturation Adjustment. Say OK. And I'm just going to tone down the saturation just a little bit. So is it previewing for me? Oops. Right, that might be a bit much. There's a happy medium, right? So it was up here, right? We're toning it down just a little bit. Now, this hue and saturation adjustment is applying to all the layers, including the background. I don't want that to be the case. So I'm going to press Control, Alt, and then G to tie this hue and saturation layer just to the people. Okay, you guys have seen me do that before. And now when I make this adjustment, you see that it's only adjusting. You can see it in her shirt. Right? And so we adjust that down so that it doesn't feel like it's quite as bright. We're trying to make the two feel like they belong together. We're already well on track here. Okay? So I have those two people feeling pretty well. But if we look down at the bottom, I'm going to zoom in here for a second. If we look down at the bottom, they feel like they're floating. They don't feel like they're part of the ground just yet. Would you agree? Okay, so we have to figure out how to ground them into the scene. And the easiest way of doing that is to establish a shadow for them in the scene. So remember 2 lectures ago when we did 107 and you cut out the people, I asked you to create a gray person in addition to the colored person. Okay? There's always a reason why I ask you to do things. I don't just pick it out of the blue. Okay? So we're going to use that now. I'm going to go to File and then Place, and I'm going to go find that gray version. There it is. I'm going to need to do some resizing to make them match up. And so I'll hold down Shift on the keyboard We'll make them a little bit smaller. I'm going to put them right over the top of each other to help align them here. Let's go down. I'm just using the arrow keys a little bit. Looks like they need to be a little bit bigger. All right, so that's approximately the same. Okay? Let me go ahead and use the people gray here. Oh, let me commit to it there. And I'm going to rename this to be shadow, or people shadow. Okay, again, for clarity purposes. And I'm not going to adjust the blending mode of this just yet. Ultimately, we're going to be putting it into a multiply to make it the shadow. But for right now, I'm going to leave it as normal so we can see the gray. Okay? So now that I have the shadow in the scene, obviously the shadow shouldn't be on top of the people. I need to get it so that it ends up being down on the ground. And I have to think a little bit about how the shadow would be cast. So remember, we talked about the sun being in the upper right corner here, coming down on a diagonal, right, and drawing out our shadow. If we were to look, let me turn off these for just a second. If we look at this corner here, right, that is casting a shadow to right there. Do you guys see that? So let me draw a line. I'm going to create, you don't have to do this, but it may help you see it a little bit better. That point connects to that point. And I wish I could make you see that a little bit better, but I don't know that there's any way I'm going to be able to make it. Can you guys see that line a little bit? Yeah, you can see it okay on the projector. Okay? So that's approximately the angle that we're looking for when we cast this shadow. So let me turn these people back on for a second. And I'm going to work on the shadow layer. I'm going to go up to the Edit menu, and I'm going to go to Transform. Please go away. I'm going to go to Transform Path, Skew. Oops. Sorry, wrong object here. It still has my path selected, so give me a second to delete that. Okay, so we're going to go to Edit, Transform, Skew. And I like Skew. You could use Warp, but I think it's a little bit harder to work with. Skew limits you in the directions that you can kind of move. So I'm going to leave the bottom in the same place, and I'm going to pull the top over. And you see how the shadow starts to distort? Right? I'm going to pull that over. I will pull this one down. I'll pull this one down. Oops. And you have to kind of be patient as you do this, because we have to work our way around and slowly get down, because we're looking to get our shadow at about the same angle. Right? And let me turn back on my people there. Oops. I should have turned, by the way, I made a mistake and I didn't turn the people on, so I can't see where they line up. So I'm going to have to do this again. Let me turn them on. And then let's go back and skew that one more time. So I'm going to go Edit, Transform, Skew. And once again, I'll start to work. There we go. Now the people are there, which we want to have them there. Let's pull these down. One of the things about the skew is it will only let you move in one direction at once, which is part of why I like the skew, because you kind of work your way into the scene in a little bit easier manner. Okay? So now that I'm starting to get close, I need to make sure that the feet line up. Okay, let me Control plus so we can see a little bit better. Okay, and obviously right now the shadows are on top. That's fine for right now. I may need to askew these just a little bit because I want to make sure that the feet line up, that toe lines up, this lines up, that lines up. I want to make sure that the angle, remember we drew a line from here down to that point. I want to make sure that same angle is happening with the shadow. I think the shadow needs to be a little bit longer. Let's pull it out a little bit. Like that. So that angle is approximately the same. There it is. Okay. Again, making sure that the feet line up correctly, which may take a little bit of extra skewing to make sure that they line up correctly. All right, that's not bad. Let's move it up just a little bit. Like that. Okay. Once I'm happy with it, I'll go ahead and click the check mark for it. And I now have the shadow. The shadow is on top of the people. Obviously, that wouldn't be the case. So let's move the shadow below the people, like that, so we can start to see it a little bit better. Okay, you see that it lines up the way I want it to. Now I'll switch the shadow from normal into multiply, which is going to darken where it's going through. Okay, so it's starting to feel like a shadow, because see how we can see the line through the shadow? Okay, unfortunately, this gray doesn't really match up with that gray, both in color and in overall lightness. So let's start first on the shadow and adjust the opacity down, right, until we start to get the right match. Okay, that's feeling pretty good, but the color is still off. So I'm going to do an adjustment layer. So let me go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to do a Hue and Saturation Adjustment. And this hue and saturation is going to let me shift the color of this. But again, I want it to apply only to the shadow. So I have to do Control-Alt-G. And I get that little arrow that ties it to the shadow. And then we can start to adjust the hue. And this is going to take a little guessing on my part. Can you guys see any changes? No, you probably can't. All right. You might, well, you could see, if you look in the white, you can see a little bit of the blue. It's a little bit better on my screen. It's a little bit more, right about there. Looks right. Okay. The other thing is that the darkness isn't quite right, so we need to make sure that that opacity goes down just a little bit more, right about like that. I can turn back on the people there. And now we have the shadow being cast by the people, and it matches up. Okay? Likewise, the bottom location starts to match up. Okay? It probably wouldn't hurt to do a little bit of fine-tuning on these people. I could do a dodge and burn to make sure that just the edges are just about right. So let me do one more new layer. Let me go to Layer, New Layer. This is going to be a dodge and burn. And this is going to be an overlay, fill with overlay neutral gray. There we go. And we could do a little bit of dodging and burning. Go to the burn tool. Make this a little bit smaller here. And I just want to add a little bit to the side of this person. Maybe a little bit to that. A little bit to that. Now notice it's also applying a bit to the background. So once again, I want this to be above my people. Control-Alt-G ties it just to that layer. Let's move it down one there. And now I can work just on darkening up that edge. I can darken up that edge just a little bit more. Like that. Okay? So it's subtle, but it's a little bit of a change. Okay, so now I have these people, I have the shadow, and they start to feel like they belong in the scene rather than floating on top of the scene. So if we press Control-0 and we can see everything, they now start to feel like they're part of this scene, right, rather than floating on top of it. So it's all about tying the shadow together to create the particular scene. So let me bring in another person. I'll go to File and then Place. And I told you I was going to work with that lady that was walking here. So let me place her into the scene. Okay. Again, I have to make her eye level match up with that horizon line. Okay, but I told you this front was in shadow, right? So we need her to be the opposite. So I'm going to go up to Edit. I'm going to go to Transform, and I'm going to go to Flip. I always forget whether it's Flip Horizontal or Vertical. I think it's Flip Horizontal. There we go. And now the shadow matches up correctly. Okay, so I'm paying attention to the photograph to make sure that they go together. All right, so let's move her a little bit closer here. She's probably a little bit shorter, so we'll go about like that. And let's put her right about there. Okay, so there she is. We'll go ahead and say OK. And then once again, I'm going to go in and bring that shadow. So I'll go to File, and then Place. And I'm going to bring her shadow in. There we go. Place. Shrink it down. And then I, again, have to go to Transform, Flip Horizontal. There we go. We'll go ahead and place that there. Now I need to go ahead and do the skew. Okay? So the reason that I put her over here is that you see that we have a curb that goes along the edge. Okay? Over here it was easy because the shadow was flat. In this case, we're going to have to go over, up the curve, and then over. Okay? So the easiest thing to do is to get the shadow set right first. So I'm going to go ahead and go into Skew. So we'll go to Edit, Transform, Skew. And I'll work the same way that I worked before. And one of the keys here, and it actually may be easier to try to establish this when it's flat on the ground over here, is that we need it to feel like it's going straight in the correct direction. So let's move that over a little bit more. That's probably about right. Now I can move it back over to her feet. Let me go ahead and zoom in a bit. This needs to get adjusted slightly. Right? Notice that that foot is probably slightly off the ground, so having a little gap there is not a bad thing. Right? This needs to come over just a bit more, probably about like that. OK, so I have this. Obviously, it's going as if it were straight, not compensating for going up and over the curb. Okay? So we'll go ahead and commit to it. I'll say, yeah, that works for me. Okay? And now, let me rename this so that it's shadow. All right. So now that I have this, I need to split this into two sections, one that's above the curb and one that's below the curb. So what I'm going to do is, because this is a smart object, see how it has that little icon next to it? That means it's a referenced file. I want this to just embed into the scene. So I'll right-click and say Rasterize Layer, which essentially takes this object and puts it permanently in the scene. It's no longer referenced. We get rid of that little reference mark. And now I'll come in with a little polygonal lasso tool. It's this one right up here. And I'm going to cut this right at the curb. So right there. And I'll draw a rectangular marquee around my object. Then I'll use the Move tool. And I'm just going to move this straight up. And I can hold down Shift to make sure it falls in straight up. Like that. Okay, so I took the shadow and I split it so that it's going up there. Now I need to connect. Let me again use the polygonal lasso tool. I need to connect and go down and back up like that. And I need to paint the difference in the same gray. So I'll use my paintbrush, and I want this exact same shade of gray. So I'll click on the eyedropper tool, which is right here, sample that shade of gray, and then paint it in right here. Like that. I could select a rectangular marquee, click, single click somewhere, And now we can see that the shadow goes here, up, and over. When I switch this into being a multiply, it's now on the ground here. Let's put it below the woman. There we go. So now we have the shadow the way we want it. Again, I have to make the tone match just like we did before. So I already have a hue and saturation adjustment. I'm going to right-click on it and say duplicate layer. Really? Come on, I'm almost done. Just give me a little more time. And I'll drag it up onto that shadow. Control-Alt-G will make the color match. I know that I changed the opacity down to about 55%, so we'll go down. Oops. Sorry, I have to be on the shadow itself there. %or so, and now I have that shadow integrating into the scene as well. So let's press Control-0. Oops. There we go. And you can see that she feels like she's part of the scene, especially because the shadow bends up and over, right, that particular curve.
When you drop the vertical lines, if it was a curved surface, would it be?
You'd have to approximate the curve. And so it takes, this was a straight curve. It was pretty easy to do. If it was curving or there was something different about it, you'd have to try to fake it, essentially. Because that's all we're really doing is faking it. And technically speaking, this shadow would get shorter because part of the shadow was being used. I didn't make it any shorter. It's an approximation, but it feels like she belongs in the scene. And that's the important part. Okay? So now that I have those two, this is done. I would do a file, save for web, and save this version of the file. Okay? I told you that I was going to show you the more complicated version, which is how to integrate it into a meadow type scene. Okay? So I'll show you that. I don't know that you'll fully get. Actually, you know what? I think you guys should concentrate on doing just a streetscape. I've only done this lecture a couple times, so I'm learning what's right and how much you guys can take in. So let's skip the meadow scene. We'll come back and we'll do the meadow scene at the end of the semester because you'll be doing a meadow scene as part of the end of the semester. So concentrate just now on getting the people and the shadows right in a street scene. Okay? If you finish one person and a shadow, do another person and a shadow. If you finish two people in a shadow, do a third person. Right? The more practice you have, the better off you're going to be long term. Okay? So I'm going to pause the recording. I'm going to walk around and hand you all your grade sheets right now. Then I'm going to bring up a grade sheet and we're going to talk about grade sheets. Okay? Okay. So this is a sample grade sheet, obviously with stuff blurred out on it so you can't see what the comments are, etc. But I wanted to kind of walk through what you're seeing because you haven't gotten a grade sheet from me yet. Okay, some of you, this is old news, you've seen this before. Okay, so at the very, very top, I rearranged it a bit from last semester to try to make it clear. It also has lots of color coding on it, and I'll explain what all the colors are. Okay, at the very top, there's a line that says how many days of class you've missed. Okay, and whether you notified me that you were going to be gone or not. Okay, and how many times you've been late. You want the first square and the last square to end up being green. Okay, that's a good thing. If you start getting into the red zone, that's a bad thing. Okay, so make sure it's not red. Okay, anytime you see red, that's bad. Okay, you have in the little dotted box, you have your current grade, right? The top row is the class average. You see that the class average right now is a 77%. That means that lots of people haven't done the required number of comments just yet. Okay, below that, you see your name and you see your actual grade percentage and your grade. Okay, and so that tells you where you are in the class. If you're below passing, that will turn red, right? So you'll know that it's not a passing grade. It's green if you're passing the class. Okay. Next to it, you have your assignments. Okay. So in this particular case, assignment 101, that person received an 80%, so a B. Okay. It turns green if it's again above passing. Okay. If it's below passing on any one of them, it'll turn red. Okay, so if you got a 65 or a 60 or something like that, that would be a D. That would turn red, so you'd know. Chances are, if it's in that category and it turns red, you might want to do a resubmit on it, right? Because you're not, You're not there on that particular one. You'll see, and I know the colors don't show up as well on the projector as they do on the sheet, you'll see a bunch of zeros. Okay? Those zeros tend to be in orange. Okay? Chances are that either means we haven't done it yet. Okay? So for example, you haven't turned in assignment 102 and I haven't graded it, therefore it's orange. Okay? But it also may mean that you didn't turn it in at all. Okay? So long term, right, if we look at the exercises bar down below, right, we've gone through exercise 107. Okay? Green, 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 green. Here we get a hole. It's orange. And you have green afterwards. This is one that you missed. Somehow wasn't posted, wasn't turned in. That's something you want to go back and correct. Okay? So we're not looking for any oranges there. Okay? Going back up to the top, it shows you what your exercise percentage is, shows you what your comments percentage is, and shows you what your total percentage is, and then what your grade is. Okay? This little box here tells you how many comments you've done. I think you should have 13 comments as of today. Right? In this case, the person has 2, which is 14% of the required number of comments. Okay? That's not exactly what you want. Go back and make some comments. You'll be in good shape. Okay? So comments are not something that's permanent. As long as at the end of the semester you have all the required comments, that's good. I'm happy. Okay? It's also not specific to, I did 4 comments on exercise 101 and I did 2 comments on exercise 104. That's okay. Right? We're looking for total number. I can't go, its grading is way too complicated as it is. There's not a physical way for me to check off, did you comment the correct number on the correct assignment. We're looking for total comments. Make sense? Okay? So in this case, total comments 2 instead of 13. That's a problem. Correct it. Okay? Now, there are a large number of grades, obviously the class average at 77% is indicating this, that are lower than you would want. Correct? Right? That is probably because your comments are low. It's also really unfair right now because comments are the same percentage at 5% or close to the first assignment. Right? So if you got an A on the first assignment and you're getting 10% of the comments, 14% of the comments, those two cancel each other out, you're suddenly failing the class. Right? At the end of the semester, the comments are worth 5%. They're the same amount. But all your assignments and everything else are worth 95%. It's a little different weighting. Does that make sense? So it's not something to panic about yet, but it'll get you started on doing the comments. Okay? So below the assignments and the comments, we have the exercise bar. Again, top row is class average. Right? Bottom row is your total. You should see a bunch of 100% there, and they should be all green. That's what we're after. Yeah?
The exercises,
Yeah.
when we do today, they're due today, or you do them before the next?
Before the next class is fine. And chances are, every single one of you at some point in the semester will forget to post one of them. Okay? Just go make a post for it. I'm not particularly worried about it being late or whatever. If you get way behind and you stop posting, that will become a problem because it's hard to catch up. Right? So you want to try to stay on top of it. But if you miss one, so like in this case, this person missed assignment 106, go back and do 106. No big deal. Right? I'll give you credit for it. We can move on. Okay? So ideally speaking, this whole bar will be green at the end of the semester. That's what we're looking for. Okay? Down below here, we have individual assignment grades and comments. Right? So assignment 101, 80%. This is a comment that I wrote specifically to you about your assignment 101. Okay? Part of the reason that it takes me a while to do grades is I believe that everybody should get a personalized comment. I don't write generic comments and copy and paste them. Everybody gets their own comment. Right? Sometimes you'll have a comment that's very similar to somebody else because your work is very similar to something else. But most of the time, I try really hard to give you individualized feedback on what's working and what's not working. Okay? If you ever have a question about what I wrote, we can sit down, we can talk about it. I'm happy to help you improve. If you were late with an assignment, there will be bold text that says late minus 10%, minus 20%, or whatever. That cannot change. When you do a resubmit, let's say you got a C on it and it was late, so your grade dropped to a 60%. Okay? You can regrade it again, and you could do A quality work, but you'd still drop the 10% because it was late. Okay? So that one always applies. And so it'll be bold and it'll say late minus however many percent. Okay, so you get more comments as you go forward, right? The exercises you can see up above. The participation grade, again, it's applied at the end of the semester, so you can always make up for lost time. Okay? If you don't do any comments and you say, oh, I'm just going to comment on the last day of the semester, I'll sit down and write all my comments, you can't do it. It won't work. Right? You will get behind and you won't actually do it. So just try to keep up with it as you go along. Remember, while you're waiting for me to start class, perfect time to just write 3 comments. You do that every day, it's easy. Okay? So you have your total grade and then your letter grade for the class. Grades are applied on a percentage basis. So, 70 to 80 is a C, 80 to 90 is a B, 90 to 100 is an A. Okay? Generally speaking, everybody falls into one of those categories relatively easily. Okay? Are there any questions about how the grade sheet works? No? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, good.